I built my electrical company from nothing over 30 years. Gave my wife everything she wanted. Raised 3 kids, including a son I chose to adopt. Then she came home at 4 a.m., whispered, "Don't ask," and I discovered she'd been stealing from veterans while sleeping with another man. My name is Kenneth Harrison. Most people call me Ken. I'm 56 years old, and I've spent the last 30 years building Harrison Electric from the ground up. Started as a one-man operation, working out of a beat-up van, and now I've got 15 guys on payroll and contracts all over Eastern Tennessee. It's honest work, the kind that makes your back ache and your hands rough, but it's mine. I built it with sweat and stubbornness, and it gave my family everything they needed. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe I gave them so much they forgot what it meant to earn anything. The night everything changed started like dozens before it. I was in my recliner at 3:47 a.m., wide awake, staring at the ceiling fan, making lazy circles in the dark. Sleep had become a stranger over the past few months. Every time I closed my eyes, my brain started cataloging details that didn't add up. The late-night phone call she'd taken in the garage. The new perfume that smelled nothing like the Chanel I'd been buying her for 2 decades. The way she'd started sleeping on the far edge of the bed, like I was something contaminated. At exactly 4:03 a.m., I heard her car pull into the driveway. The engine cut off, but she didn't come in right away. I watched through the window as she sat there in the dark, checking her phone, fixing her hair in the rearview mirror. When she finally walked to the door, her heels clicked on the concrete with the rhythm of someone who thought she'd gotten away with something. The lock turned. The door opened. She stepped inside, and even in the dim light from the street, I could see she looked different. Her hair was messier than it should have been for a charity planning meeting that supposedly ended at 11. Her blouse was buttoned wrong, one side hanging lower than the other. And there was something else, something in the way she moved, like she was still wrapped up in wherever she'd actually been. I didn't turn on the light. I just sat there in my recliner, hands resting on the worn armrests, watching her kick off her heels by the door. She didn't see me at first. She was too busy pulling out her phone again, smiling at the screen like it was telling her secrets I'd never be allowed to hear. "Long meeting," I said quietly. She jumped, her hand flying to her chest as she spun toward my voice. For just a second, I saw something flicker across her face. Not guilt exactly, more like annoyance at being caught off guard. "Ken," she said, and her voice had that edge it always got when she was about to lie to me. "You scared me. What are you doing up?" "Couldn't sleep," I replied, keeping my tone flat. "Happens a lot these days." She walked past me toward the hallway, and that's when I smelled it. Not her perfume. Something else. Men's cologne. The kind that comes in bottles shaped like grenades and gets advertised during football games. Scott Phillips wore that cologne. I knew because I'd smelled it on him 100 times over the years when we'd worked jobs together, back when I still thought he was my friend. "How was the meeting?" I asked, my voice steady as a level. Melanie Harrison paused in the hallway, her back to me. Her shoulders tensed just slightly. Then she turned her head, not quite looking at me, and whispered 2 words that told me everything I needed to know. "Don't ask." "Not, it was fine." "Not, we made good progress." "Just don't ask," delivered with a little smirk that said she thought I was too weak or too stupid or too checked out to do anything about whatever she'd been doing. She disappeared into the bedroom. The door clicked shut. I heard the shower start running a minute later. I sat there in the dark, my hands still resting on the armrests, and for the first time in months, I felt something besides confusion and hurt. I felt clarity. Cold, sharp clarity that cut through all the excuses I've been making for her, all the ways I've been telling myself I was imagining things. I pulled out my phone and opened my contacts, scrolled past the names of suppliers and electricians and building inspectors until I found the one I needed. Brian Harrison, my younger brother, 4 years my junior, and the best private investigator in Eastern Tennessee. We hadn't talked in 3 months, not since I'd blown off his invitation to go fishing because Melanie said she needed me home for some dinner party that never actually happened. I didn't call him. Not yet. But I looked at his name for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. Then I opened my notes app and started typing. Everything I'd noticed over the past 6 months. Every lie, every inconsistency, every moment that hadn't felt right. The dates, the times, the details. I was an electrician. I knew how to trace a circuit back to its source. And Melanie had just shown me exactly where this one led. By the time the sun started bleeding orange through the kitchen window, I had 4 pages of notes and a plan taking shape in my head. She thought I was predictable, thought I'd fold her metaphorical laundry and ask no questions. She was about to learn that 30 years of pulling wire and reading blueprints had taught me something valuable about systems. You can't see the damage from the outside. You have to get inside the walls. You have to trace every connection. And you have to know exactly which breaker to flip to kill the whole thing dead. I closed my notes app and stared at my phone for another moment. Then I opened my messages and typed 4 words to my brother. Need your help. Urgent. His response came back in less than 30 seconds. On my way. Brian showed up at 6:47 a.m. in his old Ford pickup, the one with the dent in the passenger door from when he tailed a bail jumper through a Walmart parking lot 2 years ago. I watched him park on the street instead of the driveway, a habit from years of surveillance work. Never block your exit. Never announce your presence. Always leave yourself an out. I met him at the door before he could knock. The last thing I needed was Melanie waking up and asking questions I wasn't ready to answer yet. Brian looked the same as always, jeans and a button-down shirt, sunglasses hanging from his collar, a worn leather messenger bag over his shoulder. But his eyes were sharp when they met mine, already working, already reading the situation. You look like hell, Brian said quietly as I let him in. 4 hours of sleep in 3 days will do that, I replied, closing the door behind him. Coffee. Always. We went to the kitchen, and I poured 2 cups from the pot I made an hour ago. Brian sat at the table, pulled out a yellow legal pad and a pen from his bag, and looked at me with the expression of someone who'd been waiting for this conversation for a long time. So, he said, Melanie. I nodded, wrapping my hands around my mug. Melanie. How long have you known? Brian asked, his pen already moving across the paper. Known for sure? Since about 4 hours ago. Suspected? 6 months, maybe longer. I took a sip of coffee, let the bitterness ground me. She came home at 4 this morning. Wrong buttons on her shirt, different perfume, wouldn't look me in the eye. Brian wrote something down. She'd say where she'd been. Charity meeting for the Veterans Fund. Said it ran late. At 4 a.m., Brian's eyebrow went up. That's not even trying. No, I agreed. It's not. You think you know who? My brother asked, though from the tone of his voice, he already suspected I did. I set my mud down harder than I meant to. Scott Phillips. Brian stopped writing, looked up at me. Your old work buddy Scott? The guy who borrowed your tools and never returned them on time? That's Scott Phillips. That's the one. Son of... Brian caught himself, shook his head. Okay, give me everything. Timeline, patterns, anything unusual. I spent the next 20 minutes walking him through it all. The late-night phone calls Melanie started taking in the garage about 8 months ago. The new clothes she bought but never wore around me. The way she'd started going to the gym at weird hours, coming home showered but not sweaty. The Veterans Fund she'd suddenly become passionate about, the same one where Scott's wife Linda volunteered. The credit card charges I'd noticed, restaurants I'd never been to, hotels in town she claimed to visit for work. Brian wrote it all down, occasionally asking questions, his face getting grimmer with each detail. When I finished, he sat back and tapped his pen against the pad. This is textbook, he said. She's not even being careful anymore. That means either she thinks you're too blind to notice, or she wants you to find out, or she just doesn't care. I added quietly. Maybe. Brian studied me for a moment. What do you want from this, Ken? You want proof for a divorce? You want to know how long it's been going on? You wanted to find out if there are others? I want everything, I said, and I was surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Every detail, every lie, every time she's looked me in the eye and fed me bull. I want to know exactly who my wife has been for the past however many months or years this has been happening. Brian nodded slowly. I can do that. But Ken, once you know everything, you can't unknow it. Some of what I find might hurt worse than what you're imagining. Good, I said. I'm done imagining. I want facts. My brother stood up, tucked his notepad back in his bag. I'll start today. GPS tracker on her car, run her credit cards, pull phone records if you can give me a copy of the bill. I'll also do backgrounds on Scott and anyone else in her circle. He paused at the kitchen door. One more thing. Where's Jake? He's staying at the rental property, I said. The duplex on Maple Street. Moved in 3 weeks ago. Needed his own space after coming back from deployment. You know what's going on? Brian asked. Not yet, I admitted. But Jake's sharp. He probably suspects something. Kids got good instincts. Keep them in the loop when you're ready, Brian advised. You're going to need people on your side when this blows up. And Ken, it will blow up. I'm counting on it. 3 days after Brian started his investigation, I got a call that changed everything. It wasn't from my brother. It was from Danny Kowalski, a guy I'd hired 5 years ago, fresh out of trade school. Good worker, never missed a day, and his dad was a Vietnam vet who'd been getting help from the same veterans fund Melanie supposedly volunteered for. Boss, you got a minute? Danny asked when I answered. His voice sounded tight, uncomfortable. Sure, what's up? I was in the truck between job sites, eating a sandwich that tasted like cardboard. Danny hesitated. It's about that charity your wife works with, the Veterans Fund. I set the sandwich down. What about it? My dad got a letter yesterday. They're shutting down the emergency assistance program, so they don't have the funds anymore. Danny paused. But boss, I saw the numbers from their last fundraiser. They pulled in over 200 grand. Where'd that money go? I felt something cold settle in my stomach. You sure about those numbers? Positive, Danny replied. My girlfriend helped organize the silent auction. She kept all the receipts. After I hung up, I sat in my truck for a long time, engine running, mind racing. Then I called Brian. I need you to look into the Veterans Fund financials, I said when he picked up. Something's not adding up. Already on it, Brian told me. Got a friend at the state charity oversight office. Should have preliminary records by tomorrow. Make it today, I said. I think Melanie's not just cheating. I think she's stealing. The records came through at 6 that evening. Brian showed up at my shop after my crew had left, spread a stack of papers across my desk, and watched my face as I read through them. The Veterans Fund had taken in $847,000 over the past 3 years through fundraisers, donations, and grants. According to the records, they'd paid out $680,000 in assistance to veterans and their families. That left $167,000 for operational costs, which seemed reasonable for an organization that size. Except Brian had found something else. A second set of books, hidden in the personal laptop of the fund's treasurer. The real numbers showed only $340,000 paid out to veterans. The rest, over $340,000, had been funneled through fake invoices to a company called Horizon Property Management. Let me guess. I said, my voice flat. Horizon doesn't exist. Oh, it exists, Brian corrected me. Incorporated 2 years ago in Delaware. Want to know who the registered agent is? I already knew, but I let him say it anyway. Brittany Harrison, Brian said, sliding another document across the desk. Your daughter. She set up the shell company, probably thinking nobody would connect her law firm to a charity scam. I stared at my daughter's signature on the incorporation papers. Brittany, my little girl who I'd put through law school, who I'd been so proud of when she passed the bar. She'd helped her mother steal from veterans. From guys like Jake, who'd given everything for this country and came home with nothing but nightmares and a government that barely remembered they existed. There's more, Brian said quietly. The checks from Horizon were cashed at 3 different banks. I tracked the deposits. Half went to an account in Melanie's name. The other half went to an account owned by Scott Phillips. I looked up at him. Scott's in on it too. Up to his neck, Brian confirmed. And, Ken, there's something else you need to know. Scott's been using that money to underbid you on contracts. He's been winning jobs with prices you couldn't match because he's been funding his business with stolen cash. That's when it clicked. The Jefferson Street project I'd lost 6 months ago. The school renovation that went to Scott's company, even though my bid was better. The warehouse job that somehow slipped through my fingers despite me having the relationship with the client. He hadn't just been sleeping with my wife. He'd been using her and my daughter to destroy my business while robbing veterans blind. I stood up slowly, walked to the window, looked out at the empty parking lot. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. The anger I felt wasn't hot and explosive. It was cold, precise, surgical. I want everything documented, I said, turning back to Brian. Every transaction, every fake invoice, every deposit. And I want to know everyone involved. What are you going to do? My brother asked. I'm going to wire the whole house, I replied. Cameras, audio, everything. I want to catch them talking about it. And then I'm going to introduce them to some friends of mine from the DA's office. Brian smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Federal crime. Stealing from a veterans charity. That's serious time. Good, I said. They've earned it. I called Jake that night. Told him I needed his help with something. Didn't say what. He showed up the next morning at 7, looking better than he had in months. The shadows under his eyes were lighter, and he'd put on some weight. The space I'd given him in the duplex was doing what I'd hoped it would, giving him room to heal. "What's going on, Dad?" Jake asked, sitting across from me in the kitchen. He still called me Dad, even though he knew I'd adopted him when he was 8. Didn't matter that we didn't share blood. What mattered was that I'd been there every day since. I slid a folder across the table. "I need you to look at something, and I need you to tell me if I'm crazy." Jake opened the folder and started reading. I watched his face change as he went through the financial records, the fake invoices, the shell company documents. When he got to the page showing Brittany's name, his jaw clenched. When he saw the amount stolen from the Veterans Fund, his hands started shaking. "This is real?" Jake asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Every word," I confirmed. Jake set the papers down carefully, like they might explode. "Mom's been stealing from the fund. The same fund that's supposed to help guys like me. Her and Scott Phillips," I added, "with Brittany's help setting up the legal structure." Brittany knew. Jake looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger, but something colder. Betrayal. She watched me struggle with the VA, watched me fight for disability benefits, and she knew Mom was stealing for veterans. "I'm sorry, son," I said quietly. Jake stood up, paced to the window, his shoulders tight. When he turned back, his face was composed, but I could see the Marine in him now, the part of him that had learned to compartmentalize pain and focus on the mission. "What do you need me to do?" Jake asked. I pulled out another folder. "Brian's installing cameras in the house tomorrow while Melanie's out. I need you to help me document everything in my office, all the files she might try to destroy. And Jake, I need you to know something. When this blows up, Brittany and Chad are going to side with their mother. Chad's a parasite," Jake said bluntly. "He'll go wherever the money is. But Brittany..." He shook his head. "I thought she was better than this." "So did I admitted." Jake looked at me for a long moment. "You know what the worst part is? I defended her. Last year, when some guys at the VFW were talking trash about lawyers, I told them Brittany was one of the good ones. Said she actually cared about helping people. She made her choices," I said. "Now we make ours. What's the end game?" Jake asked, sitting back down. "I'm going to document everything, build a case so tight they can't wiggle out of it. Then I'm going to hand it to the feds and watch them all go down." I paused. "And Jake, I'm going to make sure every veteran who got shortchanged gets made whole. I've got money saved. I'll cover it." Jake's eyes went wide. "Dad, that's over 300 grand. "I know," I said, "but it's the right thing to do. And son, I learned a long time ago that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it." Jake reached across the table and gripped my shoulder. "Count me in. Whatever you need." That's when I knew I'd raised him right. Blood didn't make a family. Honor did. And Jake had more honor in his little finger than Melanie, Brittany, and Chad combined. Brian installed the cameras on a Thursday morning while Melanie was supposedly at a Veterans Fund board meeting. Jake and I helped run the wires through the attic, hiding the equipment where she'd never think to look. We put cameras in the living room, kitchen, home office, and master bedroom. Audio recorders in every room. Everything feeding to a secure server Brian controlled from his office. "This feels wrong," Jake said as we were finishing up in the bedroom. "Like we're the bad guys." "We're not," I assured him, adjusting the camera hidden in the smoke detector. "We're documenting crimes. There's a difference." "Still feels dirty," Jake muttered. Brian came up the stairs carrying his toolkit. "All set. Systems live and recording. Everything uploads to encrypted cloud storage in real time. So even if she finds the cameras and destroys them, we'll have the footage." "How long until we have something usable?" I asked. "Could be days, could be weeks," Brian replied. "Depends on when she gets sloppy. But Ken, with criminals like this, they always get sloppy. They think they're untouchable." That night, Melanie came home at 11:30. I was watching TV in the living room, and she breezed past me like I was furniture, barely glancing in my direction. Went straight to the bedroom, closed the door, and I heard her on the phone within minutes. I pulled out my laptop, logged into the monitoring system Brian had set up. The audio from the bedroom came through crystal clear. I know, Melanie was saying, her voice low. "He's completely clueless. Today he asked me how the meeting went, and I just smiled and said it was productive. He believes everything I tell him. A pause while whoever was on the other end responded. Scott, I don't care about his feelings, Melanie continued, and hearing her say his name out loud, confirming what I already knew, felt like swallowing glass. The fund deposits hit tomorrow. That's another $42,000 split between us. By the end of the year, we'll have enough to make the move. Another pause. No, Brittany's handling the paperwork. She's already set up the accounts in the Caymans. Once we transfer everything, Ken won't be able to touch it. And honestly, after all these years of him boring me to death with his electrical codes and job site stories, I think I've earned it. She laughed then. Actually laughed. Like stealing from her husband and from veterans was some kind of joke. I should go, Melanie said. But tomorrow night, same place? The Riverside Inn, room 412. A pause, then softer. I miss you too. See you tomorrow. The call ended. I sat there staring at the laptop screen, watching Melanie get ready for bed through the hidden camera, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not hurt, just cold calculation. She just confessed to everything. The affair with Scott, the financial scheme, Brittany's involvement, even their plan to move the money offshore. I saved the audio file, sent it to Brian with a timestamp, then forwarded it to a secure email account I'd set up specifically for evidence. Then I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I slept, really slept, because I knew exactly what was coming next, and I was ready for it. The next morning, I went to my lawyer's office. Not the family attorney we'd used for years, the one Melanie knew about. I went to Patricia Novak, a shark in a tailored suit who specialized in high-asset divorces and financial crimes. Mr. Harrison, Patricia said, gesturing me into her office. Your brother said you needed immediate representation. I need two things, I told her, sitting down. First, I need to divorce my wife in a way that protects every asset I've built. Second, I need to make sure she goes to prison for what she's done. Patricia smiled. It was the smile of someone who'd been waiting for a case like this. Tell me everything. I did. Showed her the financial records, the shell company documents, the audio recording from last night. Watched her eyes light up as she realized what she was looking at. This is federal, Patricia said, leaning back in her chair. Wire fraud, charity fraud, possibly money laundering. Mr. Harrison, your wife is looking at serious time. 20 years, maybe more. Good, I said. What do I need to do? First, we're going to freeze everything, Patricia explained. I'll file an emergency motion to freeze all joint assets pending investigation. Second, we're going to contact the FBI. They'll want this case. Third, we're going to make sure every penny stolen from that veterans fund gets returned, and that the people responsible pay for it. My daughter's involved, I said quietly. Brittany. She's a lawyer. She set up the shell company. Patricia's expression didn't change. Then your daughter will be disbarred and prosecuted. Family doesn't get a pass when it comes to federal crimes, Mr. Harrison. I know, I said. I just needed to hear someone else say it. 2 days later, Scott Phillips showed up at my shop. I was in the warehouse checking inventory when Danny came to get me, looking nervous. Boss, Scott Phillips is here. Says he needs to talk to you about a job. I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice level. Send him back. Scott walked into the warehouse like he owned the place. That easy smile on his face. The same smile that had fooled me for years. He was wearing expensive boots, designer jeans, a leather jacket that probably cost more than my truck payment. All bought with stolen money. Ken, Scott said, extending his hand like we were still friends. Been too long, man. How's business? I looked at his hand, but didn't take it. Just crossed my arms and stared at him. What do you want, Scott? His smile faltered slightly. That's cold, buddy. Ken and old friend stopped by. We're not friends, I said flatly. Haven't been for a while. So again, what do you want? Scott's expression hardened just a bit. Fine. I'm bidding on the Riverside Elementary renovation. Heard you were too. Thought maybe we could talk, avoid a bidding war, work something out. Work something out, I repeated slowly. You mean like you've been working things out with my wife? The color drained from Scott's face. For just a second, I saw panic flash across his eyes before he recovered, forcing a confused laugh. What are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about, I said, taking a step closer. Thursday nights at the Riverside Inn, room 412. Wanting to keep going. Scott's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Ken, I don't know what you think you know, but I know everything. I interrupted, my voice deadly calm. "I know about you and Melanie. I know about the Veterans Fund. I know about the shell company and the offshore accounts. I know how you've been using stolen money to undercut my bids and destroy my business. I know all of it, Scott. Every single detail." Scott took a step back, and I saw something shift in his face. The friendly mask dropped completely, replaced by something ugly and desperate. "You can't prove any of that." "Yes, I can," I said. "Audio recordings, financial records, paper trails, witness statements. I can prove every single thing I just said. And here's what's going to happen next. You're going to go home and tell your wife, Linda, what you've done. You're going to tell her everything. Because if you don't, I will." "Linda doesn't need to know anything," Scott said quickly. "Linda's a federal prosecutor," I replied, and watched his face go white. "Did you forget that part? Or did you just assume she'd never find out her husband was a thief and a liar?" Scott's voice dropped to a hiss. "If you tell Linda, I'll make sure Melanie takes you for everything in the divorce." I smiled then. Not a nice smile. The smile of a man holding all the cards. "Melanie's going to prison, Scott. And so are you. The FBI already has the case. They're building the charges as we speak. So go ahead. Make whatever threats you want. Won't matter where you're going." "You're bluffing," Scott said, but his voice shook. "Am I?" I pulled out my phone, opened the audio file from 2 nights ago, and played it. Melanie's voice filled the warehouse, clear as day. "Scott, I don't care about his feelings. The fund deposits hit tomorrow. That's another $42,000 split between us." I stopped the recording. Scott stood there, frozen, his face the color of old concrete. "Get out of my shop," I said quietly. "And Scott, don't come back. Ever." Scott turned and walked away, his expensive boots echoing on the concrete floor. He didn't look back, didn't say another word, just got in his truck and drove off, and I knew I'd never see him again, except maybe in a courtroom. Danny appeared from behind a stack of wire spools. "Holy hell, boss. Did that just happen?" "Yeah," I said, putting my phone away. "It did. What happens now?" Danny asked. I looked out at the parking lot, at the empty space where Scott's truck had been. "Now we wait. And Danny, tell your dad that every veteran who got shortchanged by that fund is going to get their money back. I'm making sure of it." Agent Daniel Delgado from the FBI's White Collar Crimes Division called me on a Friday morning. Brian had forwarded everything to the Bureau 3 days earlier, and apparently, they'd moved fast. Federal prosecutors didn't mess around when it came to stealing for veterans. "Mr. Harrison, I need you to come in for an interview," Agent Delgado said, his voice professional but not unfriendly. "We've reviewed the materials your brother submitted, and we'd like to discuss next steps." I met him at the Federal Building downtown, an imposing structure that made me feel small despite being 6'2". Agent Delgado turned out to be a compact man in his early 40s with sharp eyes and a handshake that could bend rebar. He led me to a conference room where another agent waited, a woman named Cooper who looked like she could throw me through a wall if necessary. "Mr. Harrison, you've built quite a case," Agent Delgado said, spreading the documents across the table. "Shell companies, fraudulent invoicing, conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Your wife and Scott Phillips are looking at serious federal charges. What about my daughter?" I asked, the words tasting bitter. "Brittany. She set up the legal structure." Agent Cooper leaned forward. "Ms. Harrison is an attorney. She should have known what she was doing was illegal. She'll be charged as a co-conspirator and face disbarment proceedings." I nodded slowly. Hearing it confirmed made it real in a way it hadn't been before. My daughter was going to prison. The little girl I taught to ride a bike was going to be a convicted felon. "We need your cooperation," Agent Delgado continued. "We want you to wear a wire. Get your wife to talk about the scheme on record. We have the audio from your home surveillance, but a direct conversation with you would seal the case." "When?" I asked. "Tomorrow night," Agent Delgado replied. "We'll set you up with recording equipment. All you have to do is ask the right questions and let her talk." "Can you do that?" I thought about Melanie laughing on the phone with Scott, talking about how clueless I was. Thought about all the veterans who'd been denied help because she'd stolen their money. Thought about Jake coming home from war with nothing but nightmares in a country that couldn't even protect the fund meant to help him. "Yeah," I said. "I can do that." The next evening, I sat in an FBI van 2 blocks from my house while Agent Cooper fitted me with a wire. The equipment was smaller than I expected, just a tiny microphone clipped inside my collar and a transmitter the size of a deck of cards taped to my lower back. Just be natural, Agent Cooper instructed. Don't push too hard. Let the conversation flow. If she gets suspicious, back off. She won't get suspicious, I said. She thinks I'm an idiot. Agent Delgado handed me a list of topics to cover. The Veterans Fund. The Shell Company. Scott. Their plans for the money. Hit as many of these as you can, but don't make it obvious. You're just a concerned husband, asking questions. I drove home, parked in the driveway, and walked into my house for what I knew would be one of the last times as a married man. Melanie was in the kitchen making dinner, humming along to some song on her phone. She looked up when I came in and smiled, the same fake smile she'd been giving me for months. Hey, honey, Melanie said brightly. How was your day? Long, I replied, setting my keys on the counter. We need to talk. Her smile faltered slightly. About what? I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and showed her the screen. About this. I was reviewing our accounts today, and I noticed some irregularities. Money moving in and out of accounts I don't recognize. Melanie's face went pale. I can explain that. Then explain, I said calmly. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like someone's been transferring money without telling me. She set down the wooden spoon she'd been holding, wiped her hands on a towel. When she looked at me, her eyes were calculating, trying to figure out how much I knew. Ken, those are investment accounts. I've been working with a financial advisor. What financial advisor? I pressed. What's their name? His name is... It's complicated, Melanie stammered. I didn't want to bother you with the details. Try me, I said. I'm very interested in the details. Melanie paced to the window, her back to me, and I could see her shoulders tense. The wire under my shirt felt like it was burning, but I kept my expression neutral, waiting. You wouldn't understand, Melanie finally said, turning back to me. You've never understood what I need, what I deserve. What you deserve, I repeated carefully. Melanie, we've been married 28 years. I've given you everything I could. What more do you need? She laughed, but it was harsh, brittle. Everything you could. Ken, you gave me a middle-class life in a middle-class house with a middle-class husband who talks about electrical codes and job sites like they're interesting. Do you know how boring that is? The word stung, but I kept my voice level. So the money transfers, that's what? Your escape fund. It's my future, Melanie said, her voice rising. Scott and I have been planning this for 2 years. We're going to Costa Rica, somewhere you and your boring life can't follow us. Scott Phillips, I said, letting the name hang in the air. My friend Scott. Your friend is twice the man you are, Melanie shot back. He's ambitious, exciting. He doesn't spend his evenings covered in wire dust talking about voltage drops. And the Veterans Fund? I asked, moving to the next topic on Agent Delgado's list. Where does that fit into your plan? Melanie froze. Her eyes went wide, and I saw a panic flicker across her face. What about the Veterans Fund? You tell me, I said quietly. Because I've been doing some math, Melanie. The fund raised almost $850,000 over 3 years, but only half of that made it to veterans. Where did the rest go? You're paranoid, she said, but her voice shook. You don't know what you're talking about. Then explain it to me. I pressed. Explain Horizon Property Management. Explain the invoices for services that were never provided. Explain why Brittany's name is on the incorporation documents. Melanie's face crumbled. She grabbed the edge of the counter like she might fall. How long have you known? Long enough, I replied. But I want to hear it from you. All of it. She looked at me for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. Maybe she was tired of lying. Maybe she just didn't care anymore. Whatever the reason, she started talking. It was Scott's idea, Melanie said, her voice flat. 2 years ago, he came to me with a plan. The Veterans Fund was bringing in serious money, and nobody was really watching how it got spent. He said we could skim 30, maybe 40%, and no one would notice. And Brittany? I asked, my heart breaking all over again. She's a lawyer, Melanie said, like that explained everything. We needed someone who could set up the legal structure, make it look legitimate. She agreed because she doesn't think you deserve the business you built. She thinks you're weak, Ken. We all do. The words hung in the air like poison. My wife, my daughter, both of them thinking I was weak because I'd been honest, because I'd worked hard and played by the rules. How much did you steal? I asked quietly. $340,000, give or take, Melanie replied. and there was almost pride in her voice. Scott used his share to undercut your bids, take your contracts. I used mine to prepare for our new life. Brittany got a percentage for her legal work. And the veterans who needed help? I asked. The ones like Jake, who came home with nothing. Melanie shrugged. They still got some money. Not our fault the government doesn't take care of them better. I stared at my wife, this woman I'd spent 28 years with, and realized I'd never really known her at all. She wasn't just unfaithful. She was cruel, selfish, and completely devoid of the values I'd thought we shared. I want a divorce, I said simply. Melanie laughed. Fine, but I'm taking half of everything, Ken. The house, the business, the retirement accounts. All of it. No, I said calmly. You're not. Watch me, she said. I've got a lawyer. You've got nothing, I interrupted, except a federal indictment coming your way. The FBI has everything, Melanie. Every transaction, every fake invoice, every conversation. They have you, Scott, and Brittany dead to rights. The color drained from her face. You're lying. I lifted my shirt slightly, showed her the wire taped to my back. I'm not. And everything you just said? The FBI heard every word. The FBI moved fast. Within 48 hours of Melanie's recorded confession, federal agents executed search warrants on our house, Scott's business, and Brittany's apartment. I watched from across the street as they carried out boxes of documents, computers, phones. Melanie stood on the lawn in handcuffs, her face twisted with rage and disbelief. She'd really thought she'd get away with it. Brian called me that afternoon. Scott and Brittany were arrested this morning. All three of them are being held pending arraignment. What about Chad? I asked. My son, the streamer who'd spent the last 5 years living off my money while contributing nothing. He's cooperating, Brian said carefully. Apparently he knew about the scheme, but wasn't directly involved. He's testifying against his mother and sister in exchange for immunity. I wasn't surprised. Chad had always been a survivor, the kind of person who'd throw anyone under the bus to save himself. At least this time his selfishness was working in the right direction. Jay came by the shop later that day. He looked lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. I heard about the arrests, he said, sitting across from me in my office. How are you holding up? Honestly, I said, I feel relieved. For the first time in months, I can breathe. The guys at the VFW heard what you did. Jay continued. How you're using your own money to make sure every veteran gets what they were owed from the fund. They want to throw you a dinner, Dad. Honor you properly. I shook my head. I don't need recognition. I just needed to do the right thing. I know, Jake said. That's why they want to honor you. Because you didn't have to do any of this. You could have just divorced Melanie quietly, protected yourself, and walked away. But you didn't. You made sure justice happened. Not just for you, but for everyone she hurt. 3 weeks later, I stood in a federal courtroom and watched Melanie, Scott, and Brittany plead guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud, theft from a charitable organization, and money laundering. The prosecutor laid out the entire scheme in brutal detail. The fake invoices, the shell company, the systematic theft of funds meant to help veterans. Brittany cried through the whole thing, but Melanie just stared straight ahead, her face a mask of cold fury. The judge sentenced Melanie to 8 years in federal prison. Scott got 7. Brittany, because she cooperated and provided testimony, got 4 years in permanent disbarment. I felt nothing watching them led away in handcuffs. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a hollow sense that justice, while served, couldn't undo the damage they'd done. Linda Phillips, Scott's wife, came up to me in the courthouse hallway afterward. As a federal prosecutor herself, she'd recused herself from the case, but attended every hearing. Thank you, Linda said quietly, for not letting them get away with it. You deserve better than Scott, I replied. So did you, Linda said. Better than Melanie. But at least now we both know the truth, and we can move forward. I watched Linda walk away, this strong woman who'd lost her marriage, but kept her dignity. Then I walked out of the courthouse into the bright Tennessee sunshine, got in my truck, and drove to the VFW hall, where Jake was waiting. Where a room full of veterans, men who'd given everything for this country, stood up and applauded when I walked in. Not because I was a hero, but because I'd done what was right when it would have been easier to do nothing. That night, I stood at the podium and looked out at faces scarred by war and hardship, men who understood sacrifice in ways most people never would. I didn't do this for recognition. I said. I did it because my son Jake came home from war and deserved better than to be stolen from by people who pretended to care. You all deserve better. And I couldn't stand by and let it happen. The applause that followed was deafening, but what mattered most was Jake standing in the front row, pride shining in his eyes. My son, not by blood but by choice. The only family that really mattered. 15 months after the arrests, I stood in the parking lot of the new Veterans Resource Center, watching the construction crew put the finishing touches on the building. I'd sold the house I'd shared with Melanie, liquidated some investments, and used the money to build something that would actually help people. The Harrison Veterans Resource Center would offer job training, counseling, housing assistance, and emergency funds for veterans in crisis. Jake stood beside me, wearing his Marine dress uniform. He was the center's new director, and watching him take ownership of this project had been better than any revenge I could have imagined. You ready for the ribbon cutting? Jake asked. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied. The ceremony was simple. The mayor spoke, a few local veterans shared stories, and then I took the podium. This center exists because good people refused to stay silent when they saw injustice, I said, looking out at the crowd. It exists because a community came together and said our veterans deserve better. And it exists because my son Jake reminded me that family isn't about blood. It's about showing up. It's about doing the right thing, even when it's hard. After the ceremony, Brian pulled me aside. Heard from Patricia today, my brother said, referring to my divorce attorney. The final decree came through. You're officially a free man. How much did she take? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Nothing, Brian replied with a grin. Federal asset forfeiture took everything she had. The house, the cars, the offshore accounts. It's all being liquidated to pay restitution to the victims. I thought about Melanie, sitting in a federal prison, stripped of everything she'd valued, facing 6 more years of consequences for her choices. Part of me wanted to feel satisfaction, but mostly I just felt tired. Tired of the anger, tired of the betrayal, tired of looking backward. What about Brittany? I asked. Brian's expression darkened. Still in prison. Won't be eligible for parole for another 2 years. She writes to Chad sometimes, but he never responds. Chad had moved to Oregon 3 months after the trial, cut off all contact with his mother and sister. I'd heard through mutual friends that he'd gotten a real job, was actually working for a living. Maybe the shock of watching his family implode had finally forced him to grow up. Or maybe he was just running from the shame. Either way, he'd made his choice to testify against them, and now he had to live with it. What about you? Brian asked, studying my face. You doing okay? I looked at the Veterans Center, at Jake talking with some of the guys who'd be using the services, at the future I was building instead of the past I'd lost. Yeah, I said. I really am. 6 months later, I met someone. Her name was Rachel. She was a nurse at the VA hospital, and she had a smile that made me remember what it felt like to be seen. We took it slow, coffee dates and long conversations, building something real instead of rushing into something convenient. She knew my story, knew about Melanie and the betrayal, and she didn't run. She just listened, and then she told me about her own divorce, her own scars, and how she'd learned that starting over wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about not letting the past define your future. On a cool October evening, I stood with Rachel at a high school football game, watching Jake coach a youth team he'd started through the Veterans Center. The kids on the field were a mix of military families and at-risk youth, all of them getting a chance they might not have had otherwise. Jake blew his whistle, shouted encouragement, and I saw the man he'd become despite everything he'd been through. Rachel squeezed my hand. You built something good here, Ken. We built something good, I corrected, looking at the center, the team, the community that had rallied around an idea. All of us together. My phone buzzed. Text from Jake. Got accepted to grad school. Counseling program. Going to help more vets coming home. I smiled. Typed back. Proud of you, son. And I was. Proud of Jake. Proud of what we'd built. Proud that I'd had the courage to blow up my comfortable lie and face the truth. Melanie had taken 28 years of my life, but she hadn't taken my future. That still belonged to me, and I was going to make it count.